Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun alal mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Dear friends, this is continuation of the lectures I am recording for to understand Islamic finance and especially the Riba. And this is the fourth lecture. As you may recall, in the last or the third lecture, I have talked about Islamic banks and provided an example of how they operate. I provided an overview of that situation in terms of how home financing is done in Islamic banks, as financial instruments are many and complicated, so each instrument can be looked at it differently. But as far as home financing was concerned, that was I was discussing. Now, before I start this lecture, I would emphasize again that what I am doing in third and this lecture is that I'm looking at whatever the data about the Riba and Islamic finance is available in front of us and analyzing it logically. Analyzing it logically. I'm not analyzing it religiously yet. First, I would analyze everything logically to see if it makes logical sense or not. And then in next phase, I would go into religious justification of whatever position is taken by different people. And I would address, inshallah, that part. So I'm still in that area where I'm discussing these things in logical terms. And so I gave you an example of Islamic bank's perspective from the example of a mango shop selling organic mangoes, and then I ended that to run that shop, the shop owner or the business has involved a gardener who becomes the key player and key helper to run that business and expand that business. So it was important to figure out, in logical terms, what is the perspective of the gardener. Now, before I go into that, it is important to mention here that the Islamic banks are businesses. They are not religious institutions. They are not madrasas. They are not masajids. They are not trying to, I don't want to use the word promote, but they are not really, their business is not to promote Islam per se. Their business is to make money. And what they have done is that in terms of banking, some people have found this niche that this is a type of business they can make money and compared to other people, just like that organic mango shop owner decided that this was another way of making money. So the banks are businesses. So let's look at the perspective of the gardener or the hired by organic mango shop owner or the Sharia bench advisor hired by an Islamic bank. What might be the perspective of that person? So to explain that, again, I thought that I would give you an example that clearly would give you the message. So for that, I want you to imagine that you are a Pakistani parent and you live in Pakistan and you are very ethical and law-abiding type of person. You do not ever want to take anybody's rights. So you always want to follow laws, including local laws and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws. That's the kind of person you are. Also, you raise your children that way. So the your children are also like you. They don't want to break any laws and all that. So I'm talking about that type of a family. So you live in Pakistan and your son is a very good student. And what happens that, let's say he gets admission to a university in America and he comes to US and he's studying here. So far so good. And this man, young man, is also a very nice man, very ethical man. So what he does, he also joins a local masjid and he frequents there, go for Jummah and other affairs and other functions. So he's that kind of person. What happens that, let's assume that few months into his university education, he calls his family, his father or mother, and talked to them and said that, excuse me, he wanted to get married. Now that was a kind of surprise for his family, but in any way, he said that he was in a position that he really needed to marry, and he provided justification that he was young and the girls were all around and he did not want to go into anything illegal. So all those things. On the other hand, parents didn't want him to get married. As you know, parents are parents. So at the end of the day, son was not asking any unethical question, or his request was not unethical. It was just non-traditional, you can say. So in any case, son asked his parents that he wanted to get married, and ultimately his father asked him, okay, what is this girl's name you want to marry? Do you have any girl? And he said, yes. I have been in touch with someone and we want to get married. And his father asked him, what is her name? And he says, well, her name is Elizabeth. Now, listening to this, father gets very upset and tell his son that no way, he can't agree with that. This is not right. We raise you differently, and we wanted you to marry a Muslim and all that. So the conversation goes in that direction, and the son tries to convince his father that it is allowed in Sharia, but his father says no way, that he would not agree with that, despite his father's all previous positions that he was fair and just, but in this case he would say no. Now the son is also and does not want to upset his family either, or his parents. So he's sad, he keeps quiet, and the conversation ends. And after that, the son is still coming to local mosque and what happens that few days after, local imam of the masjid notices him and asks him that you seem a little upset. What is the story? What is going on with your life? And this young man shares with imam that whatever is happening with him. So imam asks him, okay, give me the detail, and he provides exact details that this is what happened. So imam thinks about this, and after some time says, okay, I think I have a solution for you. And he provides a solution to this young man and basically designs, if I could use the word scheme, and he tells this young man and that why don't, in America, many people have second names. Especially people from those societies where names are very, very different, like Chinese name are very different. People usually have second names, so why don't you do this? Ask Elizabeth to adopt a second name. And this young man is looking at this scheme and is kind of perplexed, but the imam says that there is nothing illegal in it. So why don't you ask her to adopt a second name, and then a few weeks from now call your family again and tell them that you wanted to get married and provide them that name. So hesitantly, this young man, he's not sure if this is right or wrong. He's kind of perplexed, but he's a very, as I said, very ethical man. So what he does, a few weeks later, he calls his family and talks to his parents again and said, I want to get married. And they say, well, again, we told you that we would not agree with your proposal before. And the son says, and then they ask him, who is this lady? And this time, this young man who when asked about her name, he says that her name is Soraya, let's say. Now, listening to that, his family says, okay. And then they ask him, where is she from and all that. And the young man says, obviously, she's American. Her name is Soraya. So let's, for the sake of this, this example I'm providing, family says, okay, you can marry that girl. So the son goes to masjid, take Soraya / Elizabeth to the masjid, they get married, and they are living happily hereafter. This is the most common scheme designed by the gardener of the mango shop owner or the Sharia bench advisor about the transaction for home financing, meaning just changing the name. Just change the name. And in one situation, that extra money is called interest. Why don't you call it markup? And that should do it. It's basically exact same amount coming from exact same place, delivered in exact same ways. So there is really no difference at all in these two, except the name was changed. And that's what happens this is the most commonly used scheme used by Islamic banks, advised by a Sharia advisor. And how? Well, you just write a kind of an opinion or a fatwa, and it is done. So that's the most common scheme. Now let's go forward. What happens that this scheme becomes known to people in Pakistan and young men who is living in America. Some of them also want to get married. So they become aware of this and they start using this scheme. And many of them are getting married to American women. Now, after some time, somebody in Pakistan, like me, who looks into this and tells everybody, guys, what are you doing? These are the same girls. They're just Muslim names. They're just changing names and the girls are still the same. Now, when this is known to back home parents in Pakistan, many of them said no. They stopped giving permission to their children to get married. Now, imagine that there is another young man in that town who wanted to do exact same thing, but unfortunately, his parents said that no, they have heard that young men were marrying non-Muslim women by using this scheme, so we're not going to do that. So now, another different young man is also kind of stressed and upset. So somebody tells him that there is an imam in a certain masjid, and he was very good in solving this kind of problem, so why don't you go to him again? So he goes to same imam again and provides his problem, explains to him what is going on. So imam listens to everything and says, give me a day or so, and after a day or so he calls him and said he has a solution for that. He said, what is... And this is a second scheme he designed. I'm again using the word scheme. And basically what he says that, why don't you do this? Your friend who you're going to get married, let her talk to the parents over the phone, and when they're talking, ask your parent to ask directly to your friend if she's a Muslim or not. And ask your friend that when she's talking to your parent, just say that she is Muslim. But the young man says that, but Imam, you know that she is not Muslim. Imam says that is true, but it won't make any difference. She just has to say to the people, by doing that, she doesn't become Muslim, she's just satisfying a requirement. So this young man gets married in this manner, that his parents calls and the girl says she's Muslim while she's not. Initially, the girl is also very upset and perplexed, but then she was told that it makes no difference to her. Now, this is the second scheme that is used by, in a way, a second scheme used by Islamic banks. By that I mean they bring this concept of a trust in between in the contract, which is not required. The buyer who is buying the home has no idea what this trust is, and he has been told that it doesn't really matter. You sign one paper and the property go into this trust, and sign another paper, it is sold to you. That whole contract business or the trust business is entirely unnecessary. It creates doubt and deception. Well, none of that is happening. And interestingly, just to make the point, in my example of the girl, when the girl was told that she could just say that she was Muslim, she was very anxious that it might mean something I'm doing illegal. So the boy says, you can consult a lawyer also and talk to that local lawyer. So girls does contact a lawyer, and the lawyer says, well, as long as you're doing it over the phone, it makes no difference and it doesn't really matter. So the lawyer gives his opinion. Similarly, in our home financing business, same kind of thing happens, that people are given this impression they can even consult a lawyer or a religious person, and they would say, well, everything is fine, it's all fair. At the end of the day, same thing is happening. So much so that in America there are laws about this kind of transactions, and the term used is truth in lending practices, meaning when you are lending money, you have to be completely truthful. See, this is what the basic requirement of a fair society is. That when you are lending money, somebody or some entity who is lending money and who is borrowing money both have to be completely truthful. As the one who is lending money has more influence, so the bank has to be completely truthful. So the banks also have to be truthful in front of governments. So in fact, Islamic banks are they are required to fulfill requirements for truthful in lending practices. And telling their lawyers, they'll tell them that there is nothing wrong here because things are done exactly the same way as any other bank is doing. Same money is used with same rates, it is used same way, it is divided in 30 years and given, and rest of this detail, they convince them that the rest of this detail is not changing anything. So the interest remains interest. That's why in their books, when the government asks them, even an Islamic bank, what is this, where is the interest, how much interest you're charging, they provide exact same number, the markup, telling the customer that this is markup or munafa, but telling the government this is that interest that we are charging. So because they have to be truthful. So this is the perspective of that gardener or the Islamic Sharia advisor to run this business of home financing by an Islamic bank. So how much this makes a logical sense or not. I think you have to be fair about this. That I don't see any logic in any of this, and I see a lot of suspicion in all these arrangements which were not required. And as I stated before, that the rule is just like Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam, that when he thought sun was his Rabb, but when the sun sat down in the evening, it was illogical. So if you pick up a wrong explanation, if your understanding is wrong, the actions you would take, the policies you would make, the, the contract you would design, they would become illogical. They would become illogical, and that's what is happening. Just to just to give you few more, some more flavor of this, there are other opinions also in that matter, and we should look at it. The more conventional opinions about home financing in US or in the West, or let's say in so-called non-Muslim lands. So one opinion is that the conventional way of financing, home financing, is allowed in non-Islamic areas. So in non-Islamic lands. Some people say Imam Abu Hanifa allowed it. So because of that, following Imam Abu Hanifa's fiqh, it is allowed in non-Muslim land. My question is, just in one of my previous lectures, and which is clearly, everybody knows that, and everybody is clearly stated, the riba is one of the major sins. In fact, that sin, that crime, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly, explicitly mentioned, better than any other sin, if that is our understanding. So what are we saying? That if a Muslim man goes to non-Muslim areas, it is okay to be involved in that sin? See what happens? You come up with a totally illogical situation. Is lying and adultery allowed in non-Muslim lands because you are not in a Muslim lands? So why that is different from riba? So while Quran is clearly stating the riba is so wrong. So this position people take, that in so-called non-Muslim lands it is allowed, it makes just absolutely no sense. First of all, that's a different subject, but I would briefly mention here that there is no such instruction in the Quran that that rules are different like this. Some sins which Muslims are told, people who believe, they are told not to do, somehow they can do it in non-Muslim land. That is not understanding of the Quran. On the other hand, Quran does say that if you have difficulty of that kind in any land, and if you feel that your iman is in danger or practice of faith is in danger, you can move out. World is wasi, is expansive. You can move out. But nowhere it says that you can break laws in non-Muslim land. This distinction of Muslim and non-Muslim land, in fact, has a problem, but that's a different subject. But what I'm saying is, and also not in Hadith. Rasul Akram never said so. On the other hand, we are supposed to, if we go into a land where, if we go into so-called non-Muslim lands, we are supposed to follow the rules and regulations. And sometimes some rules and regulations that are allowed to us, first of all, no sin would become not a sin in non-Muslim land. That's one basic understanding. But some other relaxation or some other restriction, on the other hand, can apply. For example, a Muslim man, if for some reason wanted to, is allowed to have 4 wives. But if you live in America, that is illegal. So don't do it because you are not in Muslim lands. So that's the relaxation. or relaxation, or rather restriction on you. There is no relaxation that you can do something illegal. Alcohol does not become legal in non-Muslim lands for Muslims. Next is, and again similar thing, some scholars say it's rule of necessity. Well, rule of necessity does exist, and the concept of rule of necessity is taken. For example, there is an ayah that meat of swine is haram on you. Clear? Meat of swine is haram on you. But at the end of the ayah, it says that if you're dying and that's the only thing available and that would be the only thing to save your life, okay, you can have it. But that does not mean that you have 5 different proteins available and even vegetarian protein available. You don't have to eat meat. So that is not necessity. Necessity is in extreme cases when that type of situation arises. So it doesn't really apply to riba, the rule of necessity, because people can always not buy a home and live otherwise. So rule of necessity is an illogical use of that relaxation of our deen. Now the next one is, which different scholars use, get the money but not as a loan. Just say your intention should be that get the money, but you're not getting as a loan. I don't know what it means. You can drink alcohol, but don't think your intent is that you are just drinking ruafza or water. I mean, would that change anything? So this is again misappropriation of a relaxation provided in our deen. That it makes no sense. These type of things are illogical. And again, similarly, lastly, one scholar has stated, instead of paying interest by making an arrangement with the seller to sell him the house at a higher price and he paid it in installments. Again, the same thing. So you know that the additional amount is there. You just either change the name or call it somewhere else. And here, it's a total deception, telling the seller, telling the builder that the price of home is $500,000, but in paper you write down 650 or 750 or whatever, because that extra amount would be charged by a bank as an interest. So you just do that. It makes no sense. And an unbiased person looking at all these transactions and explanations and schemes would clearly see deception and illogical reasoning. Now, you have to understand that, as I stated, Islamic banks are businesses. They are in the process of making business. That's their intention. Their business is not to improve your morals, not to improve your religion, not to do any of that. Their intention is to make money. Whoever is behind them, that's what they're doing. That's their business. If they write the term Islamic before their name, that means they're just writing it to attract customers. Whether it's Islamic or not, that depends upon how it is being run and what is happening, and that is a different story. Just like the mango shop owner was selling organic mangoes while getting mangoes from same place, same rate, and then charging it more and deceiving people by calling it organic mangoes. And as far as Sharia advisor is concerned, he or she is like that gardener who is stamping organic mangoes. And first of all, they are not really required. This thing is created by the Sharia advisors mostly, and also the banks. So this position is created and they carry a kind of veto power. I would go into detail of their role, but as I explained to you, the role of Sharia advisor also carries conflict of interest. Both banks and the Sharia advisor have conflict of interest because Sharia advisor is also employed by the bank in whatever way. So let's just briefly go into that. Either Sharia advisor is on salary. Some might say, some Sharia advisor might say that I'm not on salary. Okay, then the other possibility, though in my opinion, they almost all are on salary. The second is they might be getting some kind of payment from whatever instrument or they have to look into, just like any other professional lawyer or a doctor has to do. And if it is more complicated, they get more money. That might be true. But even if they are not getting money, anything at all, the position they get, the position of the power itself has a value. So they have a conflict of interest. So when I say they have a conflict of interest, see, the thing is, Islamic banking and home financing is a problem for the general public, the whole society. So they should be the one making policies regarding this. The government should be the one making policies regarding this matter. And they should be aware that both Islamic banks and Sharia advisors have conflict of interest. So I thought I should have an example to tell you that's this conflict of interest issue. So recently, I told you I was in Pakistan, so I looked at local banks, and at this point, there is a bank in Pakistan. It's a public company, Mizan Bank. Mizan Bank of Pakistan is considered the largest Islamic bank in Pakistan. I reviewed their website, and on their website they detail different things, including they have detail of their Sharia board. So in my opinion, they have the so-called highest profile Sharia board in the country, maybe even in the Middle East. By that I meant that the chief of their Sharia board, that on the top is Mr. Taqi Usmani. Now, Mr. Taqi Usmani, I don't know him personally. In fact, I didn't know him much at all, except that when I was writing my book, I noticed that he has translated the Quran in English. So because he was from Pakistan, so I included. And I also learned at that time that he was influential in the Middle East about this Islamic finance, so I included his translation. And I would go into the religious aspect of all this later, as I told before, but I would just say one thing here, that Mr. Taqi Usmani's translation about riba, in comparison to 4 other I quoted, which are all 5 major English translations, his translation is the most restrictive one. Meaning, if Sharia provides this much room for something, he only provides this much room, narrows it down in a particular direction. What he does is, he takes his reader to only one direction, does not give any other option. He gives to one particular direction. That's one issue. And based upon that, then he provides policies and all that. So, as you can see, Mr. Taqi Usmani, by translating the Quran and promoting that version of translation, he is providing theological understanding of riba. He's providing theological understanding of the Quran and especially the riba. While he is doing that, he is the direct beneficiary of that type of understanding and explanation. He is the main leading the Sharia board in the largest Islamic Bank of Pakistan, and he also carries a lot of position in the Middle East. My problem is that is clearly a conflict of interest. I do not understand. I was flabbergasted by reading this. I do not understand why people do not understand this. When I talk to people in Pakistan, they have difficulty understanding what I was talking about. This is where I say that society in subcontinent and Muslim society in general seriously is in trouble, not understanding what is fair, what is just, and what truth is. They are not understanding the conflict of interest Mr. Usmani has. It's like saying that Imam Malik, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he wrote Al-Muwatta, he wrote first about Riba in black and white, and let's assume that by providing a certain explanation of Riba, he was also leading a local bank in Medina. People would not believe in what he said. People would say he had conflict of interest. He guided people to one direction or the other. Similarly, Mr. Usmani has conflict of interest. He provided theological direction of Riba, which is extremely narrow, taking people to a particular direction, and then based upon that, he is providing his opinions and directly benefiting from it. Now, if that was not enough, the second person in that board is his son. Both of them are supposed to be religious scholars and also knowledgeable about law and justice. I do not understand. In our local masjid here in Western Mass, we do not allow two family members to be on the masjid's board. Doesn't matter how much money anybody has contributed or how pious somebody is or how influential somebody is. It is a conflict of interest having two people in the board. Here, father and son are in the same board. For somebody to understand, if that bank would want to do a new business and try to find out if this is Islamic or not, they are supposed to present that to this board, and each board member is supposed to provide his or her fair opinion, individual opinion. And then based upon that, decision is made. Tell me, father and son in the same board of that stature, isn't that conflict of interest? Would they, due to their relationships? So these two clear, glaring examples I noted tell me that the Sharia board clearly has conflict of interest, and the societies and governments should not rely on them, should not trust them. Do we need them or not? That's a different story. But what I'm saying is that there is clear explanation here that they are in violation of ethical rules. In my opinion, they are not understanding what fairness and justice in Islam is. This is not the way it works. And by the way, it's like also saying that the church or Pope tomorrow comes up with a new explanation of some banking rule, and then based upon that, he's also working in one of the Wall Street firms and benefiting from it. Nobody would buy it. So, and this kind of thing, which is happening in Mizan Bank, if you just post it to America or any other country that is more following laws, law-abiding society, they would not agree with any of this arrangement. Now, other thing is, when Sharia board or people make their positions, there are certain things they do. For example, they take sometimes this position that taking a debt is wrong. So that's why they, in a home financing situation, they come up with a scheme of a trust in between. Taking a debt is wrong. Well, why? There is no such instructions in the Quran or the Hadith that debt is wrong. Taking a debt is halal, though there are rules. One should never take a debt that one would not be able to pay off, for example. And modesty is always advised. But that does not mean debt is wrong. And debt is not, so bottom line is not all debt is wrong. Debt that is benefiting you, you're borrowing money, is allowed in Islam. Next thing is, now let's look at how translation of riba has been done by different scholars and different version of the Quran. And here I'm slowly getting into the religious side of this thing, the religious understanding of riba. Before I go into hardcore into mentioning you the Quran and Hadith, I would just go into the logical analysis of different positions. First, logical analysis of, not religious analysis, but rather logical analysis of different positions of the translation of riba. So for Pakistani audience first, or most of the people nowadays, the most commonly taken position is the riba is interest, or sood is riba. That's the position that is taken. So if you read tafsir, I would say for Pakistani audience, tafsir of Tafhimul Quran or Tadabbur Quran, you can read that page after page they have written how bad sood is, or in their understanding the word interest is. But let's just talk about sood first. Sood is and what it does to different societies and individuals. So they have provided this very bleak picture, which is true if we're talking about riba. As I told you in my initial part of these lectures, that in historically speaking, riba was very, very abusive practice. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly stated that it is not allowed. Now, in terms of next words used for, or the concept used for translation of riba is either interest or usury. Let's look into that. First of all, is there a difference between, if we in English, most English translators have used the word usury, while Mr. Taqi Usmani has used the word interest. Is there a difference? That he's using interest and everybody else is using usury? Well, logically speaking, I will tell you that English language people have differentiated between these two. They have differentiated, and Mr. Taqi Usmani, I'm sure, was fully aware of that. And that's why purposefully he avoided usury and put interest instead of that. So what is usury? So usury is, according to English-speaking people, usury is an amount charged on interest that is not fair, that is unfair charge on a loan is usury. That's the way usury is understood in those areas where English is spoken. And that's how this word was translated. Riba was translated by many. I mentioned in my book that the 4 of the previous translators used the word usury, but Mr. Usmani used the word interest. Interest to English-speaking people is a relatively recent concept, meaning in history, it's a relatively recent concept. We have to be fair to these two words and concepts, and we should be clear how they are understood. Usury is understood as a charge on a loan that is unfair, and interest is a charge that is considered fair. That's the way these words are. Now, who decides what is fair and unfair? Well, in old days, the lender decided whatever he wanted to do, but nowadays things are different. So the word interest is relevant to those times when actually the government came into this picture, and they decided that some things are fair and some things are not fair. So they come in between and they put a tab on abuses. They took away abusive practices, and they decided that the certain extra amount is fair, and that would be called interest. And that amount could change day by day, and that's a different concept why it changes. So that's what interest is. Now, so which one we should use, logically speaking? Like I said, if we use interest, that is modern concept, and usury means that illegal or unfair amount charged on a loan. Now, and I'm just ending in a question, which should we use? And I'll go deeper into that when I would talk about religious context. The other way to translate this riba in English would be religiously illegal amount. Some people have translated as religiously illegal amount. My problem with that translation is there is no religious measure for illegal amount. In religion, the real measure is justice. It's a kukulibat, it's a financial transaction, it has to be just. That's basically what it is. So to saying that religiously illegal amount, that's a misleading concept, stating that somehow religion provide a measure. Religion only says do justice. So instead of that, it should have said just amount. That might have been correct. Now, finally, somebody has translated as illegal amount. Illegal amount. To me, that makes most sense so far. So far makes most sense. Illegal amount. Now, who would decide what is legal and not legal? It cannot be an individual. It has to be a state, because state would do it for benefit of the borrower and the lender and the society and everybody else. So state would consider everybody's benefit and decide proper rules. So legal and illegal aspect would be decided by the state. Then the next question is, what rules state would use to figure out what is legal and not legal? For that, state has to follow Islamic financial rules, and there are a lot of them. And like I stated, at least more than 20. And like I said, I provided that list in the book with details, but I would briefly talk about that too as I go forward. So, as you notice, in this lecture, what I did was that I gave you an overview of what is happening in terms of in Islamic Bank, what is the perspective of Sharia advisor, what is the situation of Muslims, especially in financial sector, in the Middle East and in Pakistan. And I also provided some examples of how some simple basic fundamental ethical rules are not being followed, and and due to conflict of interest, the whole issue of banking and finance is moving in a particular direction that that may not work out for the societies. So, in any case, the next part of these lectures, or the next lecture, would be about religious aspect of riba, meaning how what is the religious explanation of, if there is, of whatever the conventional understanding of riba. For example, most people claims that interest is riba. Do we have religious justification for that? So far I have discussed with you logical or not logical. So in my opinion, it does not make a logical sense that you declare interest as riba. In the next lecture, I would talk about if it makes a religious sense. And for that, I have to provide you basic what is in the Quran about riba and what is in the Hadith about riba. And inshallah, we will work on that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us in the right direction and help us not fall into falsehood or wrong direction. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.